So now that we logged in to our SQL Server from our Allen Bradley PLC directly per the previous video, we're going to take advantage of that, and we're going to start logging data from our PLC to an SQL table in our database. So let's see how we can accomplish that. So the first thing I would like to touch on is the SQL server. So as we see here, we have our database here. It's called Logix DB, and then in there I created just a table, call it AI log. Now if we open up this just to show you the design, so what I have here is I have 5 columns, so timestamp, label, description, value, and status. That's how I declared my data types and created my table. So right now, if I open up my table, we will see that it's empty. There is no data in there if I execute it, so there is no data in there. So that's the first thing we have to look at, and then after that let's have a look at our PLC program. So as we see here, this is the login from our previous video, and now we're going to add the SQL insert that will allow us to log data to our table. So we're going to see how that works. So I'm just going to import my routine just to speed up the process. So I'm gonna get my data mapping. I'll say OK, OK, and then I want also my other routine. For my SQL insert add-on instruction. So as we can see here, now I have my SQL insert add-on instruction is right there. I have my 2 routines that I wanted added, and I'm gonna show you here in a few seconds. But before that, I need to add this 2 routines to the execution. So I'm gonna just say A00, 02. Just want a mapping, and then 002. And this time just the SQL insert. So that's good like that. And we say yes. Alright, so now they're added. So next thing we want to do is we want to add a couple instruction in here. So we're going to have here the insert query that we just added. So we want to add that in there. And other thing I want to add is another line in here for insert query of com, and we want to SQL login reset. So this is going to help in case there is a communication error, that the operation will resume once the communication error is cleared. Let's go first to the SQL insert. We're going to touch up on this first. So in here we have our add instruction. As you can see, we've got in terms of statuses query done, and then the SQL error and communication error. So to keep everything consistent with the first add instruction, if you see here, we're going to have the SQL Insert Configuration this time instead of the login. So let's open up that and see what do we need to set up in there to make this work. So if we open up the SQL config parameters, we see here that we need to specify the name of the database we want to basically insert the data to, and also we want to specify the name of the table. Now if we have a look at our SQL, so this is the name of our database and this is the name of our table. So we're going to specify those two in here. So logix db for the database and ei log for our table. So that's good so far. And then next we have to specify the column names. So if we look again into our SQL tables, those are the column names. So we have timestamp, label, description, value, and statuses. So for me, I'm just going to specify these 4 columns. I'm not going to care about the status column in this demonstration. So we'll go back in there and I'm going to specify here timestamp and label and description, this, and then value. Okay, so that's for the column names, and then I'll get into this one here, the values, just in a second. I'll just skip it for now. And then the other one we have to specify is the columns counts. So in our case we have 4. So 4 columns that we want to interact with. And then let's have a look at the values and how we can configure that parameters. So I'm going to expand this a little bit, so just to show you here. So as we can see here, we have the values is an array of 50, and so that's one of the limitations. So these values essentially correspond to the number of columns you're going to have for your table. So we have from 0 to 49 to allow you to have up to 50 columns in your table. So now if you expand this first one, which is column 1, we will see here that we have the bool, integer, real, string, date and time. Now what that means is it just depends on the type of your column. Then you'll have to configure the type in here, and you have to either manually put a value in here, or we can link it to some kind of value, so dynamically these values will be changing, because this is what we're going to be pushing to the SQL table. So to set this up, the first column, the time and stamp, so that's the date and time, obviously. So because of that, if we expand this a little bit more, we will see that in here date and time is number 4. So we have to put number 4 here, so that way we tell the PLC that this column is date and time. And then the next one is we have label. So the label is a string, and if we look here, a string is number 3. So we have to put here number 3, and then we can put here you know, something like milliseconds, for example. So that's what we're going to push to the table. And then next we have the description, so that's another string, so I'm going to put this to number 3, and then in the value here I'm going to say PLC milliseconds, because that's what we're going to be reading from the PLC and logging into the database. So we're going to see that here in one moment. And then number 3 is the value, so that is an integer, and as you see here, you see the value is already kind of changing, and I'll explain why this is already changing dynamically in here. And on the type, I will have to specify number 2, so that's correspond to an integer, or sorry, number 1. So I will check. Yeah, number 1 is an integer. So that's about the settings we have to do in here. So we specified our types, and then we put, like, these are static values, but this one here is a dynamic value. Now that dynamic value, it's actually coming from actually, before I go into that, I just skipped one thing here. So we have two things that are dynamics. We have, let me expand this here so we can see it's a little bit better. So like we said, the first one is date and time. So the date and time is also dynamic, as you can see here, is changing, and basically all we're doing here is we are reading this time from the PLC, and that's the timestamp we're going to use to log in the SQL tables, so we know when we log that value what was the date and time. So let's see where those are coming from. If we look at this insert data mapping, so that's where I kind of linked those values. So I'm just reading here my date and time from the PLC and putting it in this array, and then I'm grabbing that and I'm pushing it to like, here is the first column, value 0, so that's the date and time, and I'm pushing that array to there, so that's how we're getting the date and time into our values in here. And then I'm just simply pushing the milliseconds from the date and time to column number 4, which is 3 because it's 0 based, to that .int. So that's how we're feeding those values. So that's about the settings we have to do in there. And then just to show you this is live, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this to the side like that, and at the same time we're going to look at the Wireshark to see what's going on, what's going to happen. So right now we're not logged in, we're not doing anything, and I'm going to just reset this communication error and this SQL error. So those are a couple things I'm going to show you once we get this going. So if I go to the login, I'm going to say login first, so you can see here we logged in successfully, and then I'm going to toggle the insert, and once I toggle this, we're going to see here there we go, a few seconds, we got our first login and our first request. So now if we look at the request, which is the SQL batch, you see here this is the query that we're sending to our SQL server. So here's our table that we specified, the database, and the names of our columns, and then the values that we are pushing in, as you can see in here. So now we're gonna keep logging to our SQL table, and of course we can speed up or slow down how fast or how slow we are querying to the SQL server, and to do so we can simply adjust this parameter here, the query interval. So the higher the number, the slower the request is going to be. This, for example, to, like right now it's 5. If I put this, for example, to 1 and hit apply, we will see that these are coming now lots faster, the queries. And then in the same way, if I put this to 10, for example, hit apply, it's gonna slow down how these queries being requested. So as you can see here, now it's a bit slower. So that's how you can manage that. Now, if for example we have let's say a communication error, I just put here a couple counters, one for the communication and one for the SQL error, just to demonstrate that. So I'm just gonna zero both of them for now. So if I, for instance, unplug the cable to the SQL server, the communication cable, we're gonna see that this counter here is gonna register a communication error, and you know, with that has been said, we can use that to perhaps generate an alarm or do some other actions in our logic if we'd like to. So as we can see here, we have now the communication error is 1, and in fact if we go also to the login, we will notice that we have the communication error in here, and the program is trying to log us back in to the SQL and then starts again. So I'm gonna put the cable back, and then we will see here in Wireshark what also will be happening. So I'm just gonna clear this first. Like you see here, nothing is going on right now. Then as soon as I plug my cable, we will see immediately we are logged back in, and then after a few seconds, there we go, we have our first SQL batch or request, and then we're reconfirming the login, and now we're gonna resume the login to our table, as you can see in here. So that's for our communication error. Now let's say, for instance, when we're setting up our parameters in here, we you know, have a typo or something, and we put, you know, the wrong database name. So I'm just going to add a B in here, for example. Say OK, and I'll say OK, and then you will see that this SQL Error Counter is going to start to register the errors for SQL. So it's going to take a couple of seconds. There we go. So as you can see here, we are registering now the SQL error. And in fact, if we go down here to look at the response, we will see that we definitely have an error right there. So it's not recognizing that database. So now in the same way, if I go back and correct that name, it will immediately start to log the data again with no issues. So we're gonna say OK. So right now we see we registered like 5 times because it's gonna keep trying. So now that we corrected the issue with the database, it's gonna be recovering and registering. As you see here, now we have the query done, so that's a good sign. And if we look at here at the response, we have no errors, and indeed one row has been affected. So that's how we can monitor, some of those errors and use those statuses in our program to do different actions. So now that we have been, logging for a few seconds, let's have a look at our table and see what we have in there. So if we look at our table in here and then execute, we can see here that we're logging our data in here, and here is our timestamp coming from the PLC. Here's the milliseconds that I specify for the label, description, and then the values. So right now we've got 85. If I query again, you're gonna see it increasing. So there we go, 87, and so forth. So that's how we can basically log our data from the PLC directly to an SQL table. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next video, where we're going to be demonstrating how we can update our table now that we have some data in there.